It's so early. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Off Watch podcast, season 2, episode 2.
You set me off now.
Sorry. We've been on watch all night, as ever. The captain's just taken over, which is nice, actually. He's obsessed with Bill, the new seagull we've picked up in Bristol. And he's on deck now with him, which is really cute. He's just feeding him little bits of seagull food.
He keeps calling him his little Billy Bobs.
Oh, this could be the changing point for our dear captain, Jess.
After everything we've been through with that man, and it was an injured seagull that brought out the humility in the man.
Yeah, lovely.
Who are you, Mrs.?
My name is Hannah Herford. I am the bosun of this ship. And who are you?
I'm Jess Clay. I'm a very tired mate on this wonderful vessel, which is currently on its way to the Irish coast.
Yes.
Which is nice, because I am an Irish gal, a little bit.
But by blood?
By blood, yeah.
By blood, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
My granddad was Irish.
Oh, nice. Okay, yeah. We're heading on to the west coast, but we're passing something kind of interesting, aren't we?
Yes. I've always wanted to go and see the Fastnet Rock, and
yes,
I'm hoping we get close enough to see it, but not close enough for us to be in peril.
Yeah, it's a pretty horrific... I mean, it's not horrific, but you'd think that as lighthouses are meant to be kind of signs of
hope.
Like safety. Yeah, no, it's pretty scary looking.
It's a very bleak. Dear listener, do go and have a look at the Fastnet Rock Lighthouse, because it's very cool. And having done a little bit of sailing on Jolly Breeze, who has a bit of a history with Fastnet.
Yeah, of course, because Jolly Breeze, well, there's a Fastnet race, isn't there?
Yeah. So, she won 3 times.
She won 3 times, really?
Yeah,
that's cool.
She won the very first Fastnet race, actually.
Wow, that's cool. When was that?
That was back in 1925.
And the race goes round Fastnet, is that right?
I believe.
Fastnet Rock?
Yeah, I believe so. It starts in the Solent, and then they head out west to Fastnet.
Lovely.
And then they round Fastnet, and they go back again.
Well, hopefully, later today, we will see it.
Yeah!
That would be amazing. Yay!
That'd be cool.
But that's not why we're here!
Why are we here, Hannah?
Let's not... Okay. Today we're talking to Rhoda Willson, who is a remarkable lady who has worked for Lloyds Register, a class association, for over 30 years.
Yeah. And we'll be touching a little bit on how the Fastnet disaster changed everything, really, in yachting, safety-wise.
We'll also be talking about what is a class association, what is a flag state, why are these important, and some of the people who had influence on safety at sea.
Yeah, we'll be talking about how a man with a name of a shoe saved thousands of lives. And frankly, he sounds like a bit of a babe.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Shall we get out of these foulies and get a cup of tea on the go?
Let's do it, and hopefully we'll wake up a bit by then.
Yes.
Okay. So, Jess, you want to talk about a Fastnet race, a particular Fastnet race that happened?
Basically, Fastnet race in 1979 was hit by a huge storm. One of several of the problems was, at the time, a lot of the safety equipment, like there was no rules for having it where it was on the boat. Like, so a lot of people had life rafts stored down below.
Oh, okay.
And the stability of the boats because the Fastnet race was becoming like so prestigious, more and more boats were being built specifically with racing in mind.
Right, yeah.
And they were being built really unstable, but quite fast. And so when this big storm came, a lot of the boats were sort of stuck well out in the Irish Sea and down south of Ireland, rather than in the safety of the safety of the English Channel. But it would have been a bit more, we would have been a lot more sheltered and a lot closer to rescuers. So there was, in future races, when big storm systems were predicted, they would delay the start of the race so that the majority of the boats would still be in the sheltered waters and at least close by. So if they wanted to retire, there was plenty of places along the south coast of England for them to dip into.
Yeah.
Whereas that wasn't even a question back then. So one of the big things was, because they were built to be very fast, there was less emphasis for some reason on keeping ballast to the very lowest point. So a lot of the ballast was relatively high up, which brought the centre of gravity up, which meant the stability was really bad. And there was no rules about having to lash down ballast or batteries or anything specific.
Wow, okay.
So as the boats, because they were so unstable, a lot of them were having like really bad knockdowns, and once they were down, they were staying down for a lot longer than people would have liked, obviously. But because of that sort of knockdown and then righting action, or knockdown and completely going under, batteries and things in the boat were just turning into missiles, and people were being killed by things that weren't fastened down inside the boats. And I mean like chunks of lead for the ballast. There's a picture on a fantastic article I found by a chap we know actually, Nick Compton, in Yachting Monthly, which we'll link in the description. But there's a photo of like down below by a ship's electric cabinet, both the life rafts are in a cupboard, like fastened on.
Oh my god.
So even though boats had safety equipment, it was too dangerous for crews to go down below to actually get it. And I don't know if you've picked up a life raft, Hannah, in training, or when you've done training on boats. If you have picked up a life raft, they are still very heavy, and they're lighter now than they were. So
I can imagine.
The thought of having to carry something from down below with all of this going on, and just, I mean, ridiculous things like there were no rules about where bilged water was discharged to. So you could have it discharging back onto the deck.
Oh my god.
Which of course would just then just run back into like what they call, where you've got a cockpit that goes below the deck level.
Wow, okay. Yeah. It's just sad that disasters have to happen for fundamental change to come about.
Yes, absolutely. I'm not taking away from that at all. But one of the things they were saying, because in the report, after the disaster and everyone was sort of back home and very upset and had lost loved ones and stuff, I think it's, so whoever was doing the inquiry sent out questionnaires to the people who were there, and trying to basically find where the problem was and to point a finger, I think. And it wasn't so easy, because although, I mean, people really loved the boats that they'd bought, so they didn't want to blame the boats, although a lot of the boat builders, because they were designing to build the fastest boat rather than the safest boat, some blame had to go towards the designers. But also they were saying, even the most stable boat today, with everything that we've learned, if it had encountered that same weather system, because there were rogue waves, they suspect there was rogue waves involved in some of the knockdowns. Even the most stable boat by today's standards would still have been knocked down.
Right.
They might have righted quicker.
Yeah.
And it would have been a safer environment for crews because of the improved safety on board. But just because a disaster happened and lessons were learned doesn't mean that that's fixed a problem.
Right.
So yes, it is a shame that disasters happen before people might get that ball rolling in their mind. Yeah. But at the end of the day, the sea is vast. Yeah. Yeah. It's like the Titanic and the amount of lifeboats that had to be on every big boat. So yeah, you are right. Horrible things do happen, but also, like, I think there was a quote from one of the boat builders of one of the boats that sunk in Fastnet, as a chap called Ron Holland, who had been designing boats for sea races, ocean races. He was involved in the race as well, so he didn't just design boats for it, he was also out racing that night.
Right.
And he saw the storm firsthand, one from the cockpit of his boat,
Yeah.
and then from a rescue helicopter.
Oh, God.
And he said it was just utter carnage, but he said he was convinced that even a Colin Archer would have rolled over in those conditions. So, yeah, Colin Archer boats are a design of boat. Changes resulting from disasters like Fastnet can't really save you from when the weather is really extreme like that.
No, absolutely. Have you ever encountered a rogue wave?
No.
No,
Absolutely
no, I haven't.
not, and neither do I want to.
No.
Did you know that they didn't even believe the existence of rogue waves until like the mid 1900s?
Really? Just because, I mean, it's such a freak incident, isn't it?
It's a freak incident, and a lot of the big disasters at sea, and also like sea monsters and myths and legends about what happened to mighty ships, because the ship was so mighty that it must have been the biggest of the sea monsters that came and took it away. And the suspicion that things called rogue waves existed are recorded throughout seafaring history, but it wasn't until we started plunking oil rigs around the place that had wave height indicators.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a real name for that, but again, I don't work on oil rigs.
Yeah, no, not yet.
Yeah, but that's when they actually started recording them, and on the graphs you see these like, oh, big wave peak, big wave peak, big wave,
Right.
whoosh, and it's like 2 or 3 times the height of anything else around.
Yeah.
And
Crazy.
I don't know enough about rogue waves to really say, but I think as the water sort of goes across the world and then meets a landmass, it reflects back again. And you can do it in the bath, actually. Our listeners at home who have a bath, if you get a bathtub full of water and you move your hand through the water to the point where you get like undulating waves, and obviously as they hit one side of the bath they bounce back and start coming back the other way.
Yeah.
But if you carry on pushing your waves in the same direction and eventually they come back the other way, there'll be a point where they meet and like a huge spike will happen. And I think that that's basically what rogue waves, well, what they think rogue waves are, is where the stars have aligned and the frequencies have sort of matched each other, and there is just a point where 2 of these waves going in different directions meet at a perfect point and a huge spike of water happens.
Because there's so much landmass around, obviously in that area where they were sailing fast now, and where we're sailing now.
Yes.
But it is a beautiful, calm day. But I can imagine that in rough weather, the amount of force there is quite incredible. In the very worst conditions, if a vessel isn't correctly designed or built to withstand certain sea states or certain weather, then it can be devastating. So we have different things in place to ensure as much as possible. Of course, there are exceptions, as we're just talking about rogue waves, but there are things in place to prevent that from happening. These things are classification of ships, flag states, and ultimately load lines.
But I'm still not entirely clear what a class association is.
Yes, good question. Basically, just going to get my big book. Oh, clatter. If I just read the definition of what a class association is from this book, which is the Oxford Companion to Ships in the Sea, one of my favourite books that I own.
That's a hefty looking book.
It's huge and it's really exciting. So, class or classification, the degree of seaworthiness of a ship as determined by a survey based upon her construction and the size of the materials used in her building.
Cool.
To have a classification, you need classification societies, of which Lloyds Register is one.
And the oldest.
And the oldest, exactly. 1760s it came into being.
Yep.
And our guest, Rhoda Willson, today, works for Lloyds Register. She now represents Lloyds Register at the International Association of Classification Societies, or IACS.
Very good. Take a bow.
Thank you.
It's quite a mouthful.
So you have these classifications that you need for ships. And we're talking about commercial ships. They could be anything from like cargo ships, tankers, anything like that, down to like ferries. Anything which is working commercially needs to be classed.
Yes. If you're thinking of building a new boat, you'd have to pick the class association and the flag state that best suits the needs of the boat that you want to build.
Exactly. Yeah. Flag states. So if you look at ships, they should have some sort of national flag flying at the stern of the ship. This represents a flag state.
Yeah.
That displays the nationality of the ship under whose laws the ship is plying in international waters.
Yeah.
So this is different from a classification society or being classed, because each country has different laws that the ship has to adhere to. Classification is about the construction of the ship and the design of the ship. Mm-hmm. So, for example, the ship's flag will determine safety measures like SOLAS requirements, so safety of lives at sea. It will determine crew living quarters, things
Maritime
like that.
Labour Convention or equivalent.
When you were talking just then about the fastnet race and about the ballast, that would have come into the class association.
The amount of ballast and where it's located throughout the boat to make the boat stable.
Yeah. So you can choose your flag state. Even if your ship, say, is built in the UK, you can have a different flag depending on what rules you want to adhere to internationally. For the most part, they are the same. Where it becomes a bit different is things like sail cargo.
Oh, here she goes.
And we're back. So, for example, Tres Hombres and Tucker are flagged under the Vanuatu flag.
Where is Vanuatu? Like, is it just a fictional island created by people who wanted to build boats a certain way?
In the South Pacific, it's an island, or a series of islands in the South Pacific. The Vanuatu flag recognises engineless sail cargo vessels, or engineless vessels carrying cargo. So it's just interesting that they could choose a flag state which is so far away from the Netherlands, where Tres Hombres, De Tucker, eco-clipper ships are going to be built. Yeah. It was easier for them to use that flag state and comply, obviously, to class associations. It is a Dutch class association that they use. And, of course, they adhere to international regulations.
Yes.
Where we have an exception is the recently built Blue Mermaid, Thames sailing barge, flagged UK and is engineless and is carrying cargo.
Yes.
And Rhoda will talk about this more. And she does so beautifully.
She's very passionate about it.
Yeah. Before we get into it, I thought we could just quickly talk about someone she talks about.
Yeah.
And it's not a mistake. She is saying Mr. Plimsoll.
Yes.
And the shoe was actually named after him. I'm going to say that early doors. The plimsoll shoe, which we know of from cold gymnasiums. Rubber-soled daps, as my dad would say.
Is that what he called them?
Yeah, that's what he called them.
What did you call them at school?
Plimsolls.
Plimsolls. Yeah. We called them pumps.
Pumps, really? Yeah, interesting.
Which I always hated that. Have you got your pumps for PE? Oh, God.
Yeah. They're just quite cold shoes. But anyway, so plimsolls actually are related to the man called Mr. Plimsoll. But we don't know him because of his shoes. He was around. He was a British politician and social reformer. And he was around in the 19th century, kind of mid-19th century. In early life, he was reduced to destitution through his failure as a coal merchant.
Aww.
I think this is probably, because like I say, he was a social reformer, so I think this is probably where he became so invested in the lives of others, is that he actually went down a peg or two on the social strata, as it were, at the time. But he managed to kind of work his way back into British politics. And he was obsessed with coffin ships, what was known as coffin ships, vessels which were unseaworthy, overloaded, and they were heavily insured against loss.
Yeah.
And the owners basically were permitted to risk the cargo and the lives of the seafarers on board to pay out the insurance.
Yeah.
It was more beneficial for them to get the insurance than it was to have the seafarers return home safely and the cargo safe.
Yeah. There was a great saying that the cargo was insurable and the sailors were expendable.
Yeah.
And that's just how that's how these ship owners thought. It's just how, it's just the process that went through their brain is like, yeah, we'll insure the cargo. And if the boat sinks, great.
yeah, because it's no loss to them.
No
really.
loss
They
to
don't
them.
care.
No.
He entered Parliament again in 1868, and he tried to get a bill passed. This didn't work. A lot of the opposition to Samuel Plimsoll's bills were coming from ship owners themselves. After his first bill failed, he wrote a book called Our Seamen, published in 1873, which was quite popular around the country. There was a Royal Commission appointed to reconsider the matter. What Samuel Plimsoll was very aware of was the load which a vessel could take safely. So he was already considering the way that vessels could kind of be designed to ensure that like load levels were safe on board ships. So as a result of the Royal Commission, the government introduced another bill in 1875, but that was also abandoned. Reportedly, Samuel Plimsoll lost his temper in the House of Commons, called everyone devils, and shook his fist at the Speaker. And, of course, he had to apologise later. But he felt so strongly about this, and he kept campaigning, and the government reintroduced the bill, and in 1876 was passed as the Merchant Shipping Act. And the Board of Trade was given strict powers of inspection, and this also required a mark on a ship's side to indicate the depth beyond which she might not be loaded. Enter the load line.
Yes, or the plimsoll line. The plimsoll line is placed on the hull of the boat, and it is just a visual indication of, right, stop loading at this point. Because you could obviously put 100 tons of cargo on one boat that's a certain shape and displaces a certain amount of water generally, and then put the same cargo on another boat and it would sit a lot lower or higher in the water.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily a case of limiting a number of tons of cargo.
No, that's it.
It's all to do with the displacement of the vessel that the cargo is going onto.
Yeah.
And having lived on a narrowboat for some time, a narrowboat is quintessentially British. If you go to any canal in Britain, you'll probably see what we call narrowboats. The term filled to the gunwale was literally, if you imagine a narrowboat, an open top narrowboat, no top sides apart from the crewman's cabin at the back. The boats would be so laden with cargo and they would displace so much water that the boat would literally be having water just lapping up the side of the gunwales. And they said it wasn't fully loaded until a swallow could drink water off the ship's gunwale.
Really? Wow.
Really. So if you imagine on a canal, not so much, but a single ripple in the water, you would get water ingress. And so if it was a similar situation at sea where there are these things that we call waves, so many boats were being inundated with water and just sinking very quickly. And then later on, when they did have decked tops, the way to get water out of the boat again wasn't good enough. You also have probably heard of a scupper. So if something's been scuppered, it's been, abandoned, I suppose. Mm-hmm. If a wave comes over the side of a boat, the water runs out of the scuppers.
They're like drains, aren't
drains,
they?
Drains.
Yeah. And the plimsoll shoe, just for those who are clinging to this story, the plimsoll shoe was named for the similarity in appearance to the plimsoll line on boats. I suppose essentially also if you get water above that kind of thick sole, then you'll also have water ingress. But that's why the plimsoll shoes are called it, apparently.
Cool.
Right.
Shall we chat to Rhoda?
Yes.
Hello Hello, I'm Rhoda Willson. I work for Lloyds Register and have done for more years than I care to remember, over 30 anyway. And my current role depends on how much you understand about ship classification. All ships have to be classed, and there are a number of classification societies around the world, some of whom are members of the International Association of Classification Societies. We survey ships. So during construction and before construction, we check that the plans are in compliance with the regulations that we write on the basis of our experience of what will withstand 20 to 25 years of service. All ships also have to comply with the regulations that the flag with which they are registered enact in their national legislation. So in the same way that buildings have building regulations, shipping has shipping regulations. The International Maritime Organization agree on a minimum standard that the flag administrations then enact into their national legislation. So my current role is representing Lloyds Register's views at the general policy group of the International Association of Classification Societies.
Gosh.
Bit of a conversation stopper, isn't it?
I assume you didn't come out of school and think, I know what I'm going to go into straight away. Was there a bit of a leap?
It was actually jolly nearly that.
Really?
My school was buying into a system where you filled in all these likes and dislikes about what you thought you'd like to do and which subjects you enjoyed at school. And those were all sent away to the mainframe computer and fed in, and you got back a list of options of possible jobs. And naval architect was one of them. I loved maths and physics, and the computer turned the handle and produced naval architect. So I did a bit of research into that and learnt about classification societies. And from that point, I knew I was going to be a naval architect. And for preference, I would work with Lloyds Register.
That's amazing. Although it's kind of sad. I feel like we've had a bit of a backward step.
Yes. I think perhaps maybe in the maritime industry, we haven't been as proactive enough as we should have been. And we do need to get out into the schools and tell them what a wonderful industry it is to work for.
What did you study at university then? Was that quite a clear path for you?
Oh, yes. When I was looking at universities, there were 5 universities that did a naval architecture degree. I applied and ended up at Southampton. So yes.
Right. And you went straight into a naval architect job at Lloyd's?
Yes.
Wow,
yes.
This is such a smooth path.
Oh, if only. It didn't feel like it at the time.
No.
I applied to join the Lloyds Register Surveyor Training Scheme. They couldn't take me on in that year, but they did phone me up and say, we can offer you a job as a structural assessor in plan approval. So this is where the plans come in, you sit down with the rule set and you say, yes or no, this ship complies. So as I was just about to graduate, I said, yes, of course, I will take your job. Thank you very much. And so I joined Lloyds Register.
Fantastic. And did you have any interest in maritime before you got that punch card back?
Vaguely. My grandmother lived in South Shields, quite close to the coast. So we saw a lot of shipping in the distance and obviously went to the beach. And she actually lived just round the corner from the Sea Cadet Training College. And I loved the fact that it had radar on the top of the building. And I thought that would be fun to do. I quite fancy going to sea. But my parents weren't too keen on that idea, so I didn't go to sea. I did the next best thing.
So have you kind of moved around in your jobs, or has it kind of...
Yes.
Yeah.
So I started out as a structural assessor where I was actually approving loading instruments, where you assess the bending moments and shear forces at various points along the hull to make sure that it was going to be fine loading in that pattern. So that was my first job. Shortly after that, catamarans became more popular. I was doing plan approval of catamarans. Then I was sent overseas to northern Spain, El Ferrol, where I did some work in a shipyard looking at new construction of a floating production storage unit. And we did some existing ship surveys as well. When I came back, I did some work in the yacht and small craft department. After that, I moved down to do stability and load line. So that was a bit of a steep learning curve. So I was the Lloyds Register lead person on load line. So any load line questions would come through to me. From stability and load line, I moved to what was called External Affairs Department, where I was going to the IMO on a regular basis to follow the discussions on the new regulations coming through there, and going back to Lloyds Register and making sure that they were implemented properly. And at that time, I started helping the IACS safety panel representative, and I would obviously be providing the answers on the load line issues that came up through IACS. When he had to stop because of his other duties, I was put in to become the Lloyds Register representative on the safety panel. So that meant finding the relevant experts in Lloyds Register if I didn't know the answer myself, and generally dealing with the questions that came through that panel. So I was exposed to a whole range of different subjects. Just over 3 years ago now, I became chair of that safety panel and moved on to my current role, where I've got just a general oversight of all Lloyds Register's work with IACS and being the GPG member.
What would be your advice on building an engineless sailing vessel that would ship cargo? I'm asking because this has already happened in the UK. You might have heard of it. It's called the Blue Mermaid, and it's a Thames sailing barge, and they're flagged under the UK flag, whereas I know some Dutch vessels, and they're doing a very similar thing, are flagged under Vanuatu.
First of all, find your flag and work very closely with them, because sailing vessels and wooden ships tend to be excluded from the international regulations. Things like the COLREGs, collision regulations, obviously have to apply across the board. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure how much MARPOL, so that's Marine Pollution Prevention, I'm not sure how much of that would strictly be applied. So there's a lot of legislation, and you really do need to understand what it is you're going to have to comply with. You need this very close discussion with whichever flag you're going to go with, because they will be the ones ultimately who say, yes, we've agreed this.
Hannah mentioned Blue Mermaid. She's just been awarded the ability to load cargo, I think up to a maximum of 112 tonnes. And she has a load line exemption. Could you tell us what a load line is and why that vessel might need an exemption?
I can't tell you about why it would need an exemption, but there are possible reasons. Load line. Mr. Plimsoll back in the 1800s got very upset, quite rightly, that ship owners were overloading the ships. So eventually, the British Parliament agreed the Board of Trade requirements for loading. and I think it was 1 inch for every 3 feet of depth. So if your ship was 6 foot deep, then you had to have a freeboard, which is the distance between the wet stuff and the deck, of 2 inches. So that's 50 millimeters. Not an awful lot, really. The Board of Trade insisted that ships had to comply with this. Eventually, the rest of the world cottoned on to the idea that actually it wasn't a good idea to have ships sinking because the water was getting into them. And they got together in the early 1900s and started drafting the first load line convention. So you then had 1920s load line convention, which basically said, if your ship is so long and so deep and so wide, then you need a minimum distance between the deck and the water in calm water of a certain amount. There are few other factors taken into account. And so that then became an international standard. It was subsequently updated at the IMO. So the load line is a circle of a certain dimension with a horizontal line through it. And that horizontal line says that in summer regions, this is the deepest you can load your ship. And you will not submerge that load line under any circumstances. There are a couple of other lines associated with it. One for an allowance for fresh water, because obviously the density of the water, you sink lower in fresh water than you do in salt water. And so you're allowed to go a little bit lower on the assumption that when you get to sea in the salt water, you will naturally come up to your saltwater line. If you're going out into the winter areas, so regions where the weather's worse in general, you have to be a little higher out of the water. So you've got a little bit more freeboard, if you like. The winter North Atlantic is an extra addition to your summer load line for small ships. So your less than 500 GT traditional built cargo vessel would, if it was sailing across to America, have to sail at the winter North Atlantic mark. In the tropical areas, you've got a slightly deeper allowance, so you're allowed to go deeper in the water because the weather's better.
Great.
So that's load line.
Amazing.
Associated with the load line mark are various requirements on means for keeping any openings in your deck shut. So your cargo hatches have to have sills of a certain height, and you have to make sure that the covers are adequately secured. So if you're going for wooden battens and tarpaulins, which a more traditional vessel would do, there's separate regulations about the strength of the tarpaulin, how frequently you've got to go around checking the ropes that you're securing it with are tight, and all that sort of thing. And of course, having got the water on the deck, you need to get it off the deck again as quickly as possible, which is where your freeing port regulations, which are also included in the load line, come in. So why you would need exemptions could be because you don't comply with one or other of those additional regulations that come in conjunction with your load lines. Or it may be that the flag administration said, well, actually, working out how to do a load line calculation for this type of ship is going to be too difficult for us, so we'll just exempt you completely. I did actually check on the load line convention to see if it mentioned traditional vessels.
That's good homework for me and Hannah as well. We can get in touch with Richard and Hills on Blue Mermaid and see exactly why they were exempt.
Yeah. So Regulation 2, paragraph 3 says ships designed to carry sail, whether as the sole means of propulsion or as a supplementary means, shall be assigned freeboards in accordance with the provisions of the regulations. Additional freeboard may be required as determined by the administration. So it may well be that whichever flag it is has said, I'm just exempting you.
Yeah.
And they've done some calculations and said, we would much rather you didn't load more than 112 tons.
Fascinating. Okay.
So you are a walking encyclopedia of knowledge, and I feel like you don't get that level of knowledge about a subject unless you're incredibly passionate about it. So what is it about I assume you love your job, and if you do love your job, what is it about your job that you love the most?
The fact that what I do helps keep people safe. That is the raison d'etre of Lloyds Register, is the safety of life at sea.
Lovely.
And that to me is important. Recently, someone said to me, don't you worry that it's still called seaman, chairman, and gender specific words. I said, when we can say hand on heart, there are no seafarers being lost at sea because they've got cargo liquefaction and the ship has gone down like that in 2 minutes or less and they've not had a chance, then I'll worry about what I'm called.
Yeah.
But until that point, people can call me what they like. I'm not going to worry. It really does not worry me.
Fair play.
You've got to stop people being killed at sea, and that's what makes me go to work every day and try and do my bit.
That's lovely. It's such a lovely answer.
Yeah.
Such a passionate answer as well. I love it.
That's great.
We're having such a lovely time speaking to all of these women who have come to us through the Rewriting Women into Maritime History and the Sea Sheaves project. And it's like, I love it. I'm all for advocating women doing everything. But at the same time, so many of the women have turned around and said, it doesn't matter that I'm a woman. I'm here because I'm good at my job, or because I'm knowledgeable about this, or because of this, that and the other. It's nothing to do with my sex. And thank you for being honest about that. That's wonderful to hear.
So you've been in the industry for a long time now. You've seen how how vessels are changing. Do you feel that the industry is meeting the challenge of climate change in an appropriate way?
I do hope that it has grasped the decarbonisation challenge. Mm. The frustration now, I think, is that the onshore side isn't prepared,
right,
and that the legislation isn't there. They need to know, is it going to be safe? When my first boss started in the shipping industry, container vessels weren't in existence. So in 30 years, they were commonplace. So I can hope that in 30 years, we will be back to using ships with sails or ships which use some other less horrible polluting fuel with maybe sail assist, so kites to help reduce the drag so that you don't use so much fuel.
And with the development of these new technologies, which is funny to class sails as new technology, in your department with classification, are you seeing that new classifications are having to be created? Or is that not quite? Are you still trying to shoehorn things into existing classifications at this point?
That's a difficult one because Lloyds Register's got rules going back to when sail was the means of propulsion. Sure. So it's
easy peasy.
It's just a case of dusting it off and saying, well, actually, according to our rules dating from 17 whatever,
brilliant.
For a sail acreage of this, you need a mast this size. And if I may plug the Lloyds Register Foundation, which is our charitable overarching owner, they have just literally released all the historical rules available on our website, free for download. So if you want rules for ships going back to whenever our rules go back to. They are there and freely available for people to consult.
Cool.
And it will tell you how thick your planks need to be and everything that you could hope for.
How useful to know that so many people are interested in starting sail cargo companies and wanting to do it for personal reasons as well, that they now have this resource available for free, I assume?
Yes, completely for free.
On your website as a starting point. That's
The
invaluable.
Lloyds Register Foundation.
Yeah, lovely. Since you've been working in the field, have you had anyone that you've looked up to? Or have you had anyone across other aspects of maritime?
Well, all my managers have been very supportive, very helpful, and I hope that now I also inspire people to go on, just passing it on. I mean, Mr. Plimsoll, obviously, very important person.
Yes.
And he did so much to make ships safer. He's very underrated, I think.
Did you feel, Rhoda, that you were almost carving your own path in Lloyd's? Were there any other women that you were working with, looking up, that could look up to, or was doing your job that you could go, that person's doing it, so can I, we look similar, probably both female, all of that?
When I joined LR, there was me and one other in the plan approval office. There were, I think, maybe some others working in the statutory department at that time, maybe 2 others. So we were very much a rare breed. Most women in the company were in the support side, so doing the typing, doing the filing.
Why do you think that is?
Historically, women weren't allowed to work, and certainly they weren't educated to do maths and physics. And if you did like maths and physics, I mean, even in my school to a certain extent, because you did maths and physics and you enjoyed them, you were a bit of an oddity. But now there are many more women in the technical roles, and it's certainly improving. When I joined, no, there were no females in senior positions. Now in Lloyds Register, we do have half of our executive leadership team who are female. Part of the problem is you don't have technical women coming through.
That's it, isn't it? Yeah.
Because they're not doing the degree in the first place. They're not doing the maths and the sciences. So we're back to should we be out in the primary schools showing girls that actually it's okay to do maths and enjoy it.
Yeah.
But do you think the barrier still is, like you say, women aren't encouraged to be interested in those subjects? Or is it still a case of women have to choose between a career and a family?
I don't think so. I think it is just general perception that maths and physics are boring or men's or just, it's too difficult.
It's about being encouraged though, isn't it?
Yes.
Completely. And I think as well, because we have a problem in the maritime sector where if you look on the deck of any traditional boat, you see white people.
Yeah.
And I've said this to quite a few of our interviewees, but unless you can look up onto a boat and see someone who looks like you, where is the encouragement to go and find out more about it yourself? So
yeah,
it's a big topic.
Big topic.
Very big topic.
Love it. Do you have a particular project or time in your career that you're particularly proud of that stands out to you?
Two times, I think. When I was the Lloyds Register lead on Load Line, I enjoyed that. That was dealing with the questions, working back from first principles, what's the fundamental point of Load Line, what's it trying to achieve, and working with the clients and trying to find ways if they didn't want to comply with the letter of the regulation, helping them find ways to meet with the spirit of the legislation. So that to me was thoroughly enjoyable. And the last 3 years where I was chair of the safety panel, I really thought I achieved something there that was very, very hard work. And I wouldn't do it again if you paid me twice as much. But there was a very definite sense of satisfaction that I had achieved something. We had taken a minuscule step in the right direction to making somebody's life better and, somebody's safer because of what I've done. And you can't beat that, can you?
Oh, she's so great. She knows so much.
Wow. And that, I mean, if only it was so easy to just give a computer your likes and dislikes and it says, right, this is your job that you'll be doing for the rest of your life. Yeah. I can't believe that.
No, so good.
She knows so much about so many things.
Yeah. Yep. And we go into the exemptions that Blue Mermaid, the Thames sailing barge, has.
Yeah, I did catch up with Richard Titchener recently and asked him about his exemption for Blue Mermaid. He said it wasn't possible to achieve the necessary load line.
Right, yeah, because it's using a design of a ship that's over 100 years old.
Yeah, there was no obvious place in the regulation framework, basically, for it to fit into a tick box. So It was exempt because it was easier to exempt the boat than to do a bunch of calculations, and she's a big flat boat. I think Richard was also saying that the Thames barges would have taken up to 150 tons of cargo.
Right. Okay.
So for them to only be taking 112, I would imagine that's also an additional. We're not sure how much you can take. We know you can probably take 150, but if we drastically reduce that to 112, then you should be golden. Yeah. I believe that's the gist of it. But I do think we should talk to Richard Titchener and his lovely lady, in a future podcast, because Thames barges are a whole different part of traditional boats that are fascinating, and they're an interesting mix between the sailing boats that I love so much and also my canal boats.
Yeah, that's true. They're linked, aren't they?
They are kind of linked, yeah. So we'll catch up with Richard, probably season 3. So
lovely.
Oh, by the way, there's probably going to be a season 3.
Yeah. They said on episode 2 of season 2.
Yep.
Yeah, there's going to have to be, I think. We've got so much to say.
And one of the incredible things about doing these interviews, and not just with the fantastic women we're meeting, but just generally, it opens up so many new avenues for us to explore. And so we're learning so much and enjoying it so much in this hour we have between scraping up seagull poo and setting ripped sails as we race our ship to the fastnet, which I think we're so close to now. I can see it, a little speck in the distance.
I think I can hear the captain shouting. I think we might be there, Jess.
Oh my gosh, let's go. Yay! I'm so excited. All right, well, leave them mugs there and I'll wash them up in a minute, and let's go and have a look at the Fastnet Lighthouse.
Yay! Okay, fair winds, everyone.
Fair winds.
We are doing this season in collaboration with the She Seas project, which is part of Rewriting Women into Maritime History, run by Lloyds Register Foundation. You can read more about that in our descriptions and our links. We talk about it also in season 1, and it's wonderful that we're part of this. So thank you very much to the She Seas project and to the Lloyds Register Foundation.